The shot you're about to see was done with just one light. Alright, here's how I did it. So basically the way a shot like this works is I shoot multiple passes, which is multiple takes of exactly the same shot over and over, and then I layer them together in post to create one composite shot. I made this shot as an excuse to explore the possibilities of the Godox LC500R LED wand. This is a really versatile LED light. It's color temperature switchable from 2500 to 8500K. It has full RGB, and it has 14 customizable FX modes. I filmed the shot with the Sony a7 III and the TT Artisan 21mm f1.5 lens. The picture profile was HLG3. And I made the camera move by putting it on the Syrup Genie 3-axis motion control kit with the Magic Carpet carbon fiber slider. This allowed me to do perfectly repeatable camera moves that I could trigger from the Syrup app on my iPhone. Now I'm going to do a lighting breakdown. The first pass I'm going to talk about here is the foreground pass, which is the only take that included me in it. The lighting from this pass came from outside the kitchen window, where I created a setup with the LC500R at daylight setting, 100% power, shining into a bed sheet. And I set up a big silver reflector to catch the spill light and redirect it toward the bed sheet. So this light shined through the window, illuminated the back wall of the kitchen, and created a silhouette of me. Then for each pass after that, I moved the LC500R to a different spot in the kitchen. I just used gaff tape to stick it up in different weird spots. And I changed the color of the light with the LC500R's remote control. And I triggered my motion control to do the same move over and over. For one of the passes, I put the light in the oven, and I used the candlelight FX mode to make the light dim up and down. And finally, I did a couple passes where I turned on the actual lights in the kitchen. Next, I'll give you an overview of how the composite came together, and then I'll take you into my editing program and take you through it step by step in a lot more detail. So let's start with the compositing overview. My first layer was the foreground pass, with the only light coming through the window behind me. I drew a mask around myself, roughly, and the area that the refrigerator door would be in. This masked portion here would not be influenced at all by the other layers. Then I created a duplicate of the foreground pass without the mask and set the blend mode to lighten. Then I added the oven pass, the light on the lower right hand side, with the blend mode set to lighten, and the stove pass, the blue light above it, with the blend mode also set to lighten. And on top of that, I added a masked portion of the practical source pass to cover up the LC500R, which was visible in the frame. The blend mode of the practical source pass was set to normal, so it would completely cover up anything that was beneath it. And I changed the color of the practical source to blue so that it would match the light that had come from the LC500R. And then I repeated the process again with the kitchen sink pass, first adding the pass with the LC500R with the blend mode set to lighten, and then covering up the LC500R by adding a masked portion of the practical source pass on top of it with the blend mode set to normal, and the color shifted toward yellow so it would blend in better. Finally, I repeated that process one more time with the kitchen counter pass, blend mode set to lighten, and then the practical source pass on top of it, blend mode normal, and color shifted toward red. Now we'll go into my editing program and I'll do an even more in-depth breakdown on how this all came together. Okay, here we are in the world's best compositing software, Final Cut Pro X. Just kidding. I've just enabled the foreground layer, and now I'm going to enable the mask. I used the Draw Mask tool, and everything inside the mask is opaque, everything outside the mask is transparent. Notice that I used a very heavy feather on this mask. This helps to blend everything a little more smoothly without noticeable seams. Now we add in the copy of exactly the same layer. These two layers are exactly the same, only the copy that I've just enabled here does not have a mask. The blend mode of the copy is set to lighten. So everything here will only lighten the other layers that they interact with. Now let's add that oven layer. There we go. See, the oven light just turns on like that. And that's because its blend mode is also set to lighten. So all this layer is able to do is lighten the foreground layer. So I used the opacity control with some keyframes to adjust the overall brightness of the oven layer as the scene goes on. So it gets brighter here, then it gets way dimmer, as you can see here, and then brighter again. More opacity equals brighter light. I also used the color board effect with a shape mask to control the spill of this light onto the rest of the frame. So I've turned on the view masks function so you can see exactly what this mask is doing. So what this shape mask is doing is basically dividing the color board effect into two halves. You have the inside and you have the outside. Inside, outside. What's white is on the inside, what's transparent is on the outside. So outside the mask, I lowered the highlights all the way. And what that means is that everything outside this mask became dark. So just to make this super clear, I've turned off the other layers so you can see that the oven is bright and everything outside the oven's black. If I adjust the highlights outside and bring them up, you can see that now all the extra spill light from the oven is visible across the frame. And if I enable my other layers, then that spill light stays visible because of the blend mode, because of the lighten blend mode. So now the lightness of all the different layers are interacting with each other. Now I didn't want this much spill from the oven because that's way too much light. I don't want that reaching all over my frame. So that is why I brought down my highlights all the way outside of the mask. Essentially, this is performing the same function as the draw mask, but it's a little more versatile because actually I could add more shape masks if I wanted and create more sections where you're able to see the spill light across the frame. You see, as I move this, the spill light becomes visible. And if I move it away, spill light disappears. And I can create as many shape masks as I want and highlight different parts of the frame. So once again, just to be clear, I used my opacity control to adjust the overall brightness of the oven throughout the shot, basically fading it in and fading it out. And I used this color board effect with shape mask to control the spill of the light from the oven. There's a few more color board effects here. Those are just adjusting the saturation and the hue of the color. Next, I'm enabling the stove lamp layer, which is the blue light that I just turned on here. I've controlled the spill of this lamp using the color board and shape masks exactly the same as I did with the oven layer. Notice that because this layer is below the foreground layer of me with the mask, when I enable the foreground layer, it covers up the stove lamp layer completely. And basically what this means is the stove lamp's blue light cannot spill at all into this portion of the frame. This is fully opaque, this section of me. Just to make it super clear why I had to do that, I'm going to change the blend mode of my foreground layer to lighten, just like the other layers. Let's see what happens. Suddenly I become transparent. And that's because my body was not in all the other passes. Everything else in the kitchen stayed the same, except for the door here, but my body wasn't in the other passes. To avoid this effect, I have to keep the blend mode of the foreground layer at normal. Now let's talk about how I covered up the LC500R with the original stove source. And I'm going to start by explaining the logic of this. So what I wanted here was I wanted the blue output of the LC500R, but I didn't want to see the light itself in the shot because obviously that big video light shouldn't be there. So what I did was I added this practical source pass that you can see here, which is just the stove lamp source and no other lights. I dropped that into my timeline on top of the blue stove lamp layer. Now at the moment, it has completely obliterated the stove lamp layer because this light is overall a little bit brighter. So what I had to do first was I created a mask so that only what's inside this square remains visible from the practical source pass. In other words, all the rest of the spill from this light is now cut out, and all you're seeing is the source itself with a bunch of feathering on that mask. Then I used the colorize effect to turn it blue so that it would match the LC500's output. So now this is the light from the LC500 down here, and this is the actual stove light source. And they blend together fairly smoothly because they're the same color. I've tinted the source to match the LC500. So if I remove both these layers, it goes black. If I turn on just the source layer with its mask, then it doesn't cast any light onto the stove. But then if I add back in the stove lamp layer, the LC500R, it fills out the rest of this section with blue light, and that's what we want. And just like I showed you with the oven layer, I'm controlling the spill of the LC500R by using the color board with shape masks. and darkening everything that's outside of this white mask. I repeated the same process that I just showed you with the counter lamp here and the counter source to cover it up, and with the sink lamp here, and with the sink lamp source to cover up the LC500R. My final trick here, and for me the most fun part, was making the lamps flicker. So even though the LC500R is capable of flickering and doing different effects modes, I wanted to create these flickering effects in post so that I could synchronize them better and control them more specifically. This is actually the best part for me of doing multiple pass shooting. You can control each layer separately. So if I just want to take one frame and have the light suddenly go black there, all I have to do is disable the layer at that spot. Now, I didn't always want these lights to go black, and I didn't want to just use the opacity control. So on the frames I wanted to darken for the flickering effect, I divided up the shot at that point. Each of these is one frame. And then I selected the frame that I wanted to affect, and I created a new color board effect, as you can see here, and I lowered the highlight value at that point. So the highlight level controls the brightness of the light in the shot. I could have also made the lights go brighter in that one frame, but of course I would have to make sure to adjust the brightness of the light and the source layer so that they matched. So here I just created a flash. So when we zoom back to see the whole timeline, you can see the start of the clip is where each light enters the shot, the point when the light turns on, and the end of the clip is where the light turns off. And all these little divisions here are where I chose to make the light flicker by chopping up the shot and then adjusting the brightness of the light individually at each frame. And that's how I put this all together. Okay, I hope you liked this video. If you want to see another video like it, check out my video about deleting the lights from your scene, which is also on my channel. And of course, please click like on this video, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you know as soon as I post another one. Thanks so much, I'll see you next time. In this course, you're going to learn the run and gun filmmaking techniques that I've developed over years of practice, and you'll learn how to apply your photography skills toward making great videos. We're going to start with the basics. Here you'll learn how to set up your camera and do basic camera movements, both handheld and on a gimbal. Then I'll teach you how to direct an actor and do basic scene coverage so that you'll be able to shoot a complete scene that cuts together smoothly. Then we'll get into the really fun stuff like complex gimbal moves, shooting out on the street, field audio, and hyperlapses. You'll learn some specialty skills like filming a moving vehicle, action sports, and drone filmmaking. Then the shooting lessons will finish with improvised portraits and a party on the beach, where you'll learn some important skills for low light shooting. Then it's on to editing, where I'll show you the methods I've developed so I can effortlessly work with any amount of footage. First, you'll learn how to import and organize your clips. Then you'll learn to create string outs, scenes, and master projects. Then I'll take you step by step through each scene in the film, showing you exactly how I put it together, and most importantly, why I made my creative decisions. Filmmaking is storytelling, and learning to tell a story with the edit is the most important skill of all. I'll show you how I add sound effects and music, and then we'll do some finishing touches like color correction, audio level mastering, and export. So through the making of this short film, you'll learn essential video skills that have taken me years of real-world practice to develop. So I hope you're excited. Let's go ahead and get started.